for a couple of minutes. Hi everybody, thanks for coming in. Just give it a few more minutes whilst we wait for a few more. I'll be introducing Rob, who's beaming to us live from California. So we've got Carolyn Runcie in Bournemouth, me in South Wimbledon, and Rob in California. What could be finer? Let's just wait. We'll probably start. We've got a few more and just do the introduction, and people can watch the recording as well. So let's get the recording going. Hi everybody, welcome to the Practitioner Talk. We'll just give it a couple of minutes more when we get a few more students on. Welcome to anybody on YouTube live stream, watching live or the recording. This is yet another amazing RCA Service Design Practitioner Talk, SDTV, Service Design TV. Give it another moment, see if we get a few more.
I just realized because you're recording this on YouTube, it is inevitable that my parents will watch this. So that's just up the stakes.
I'll send them the link. Yeah, that's great to know. Where do your parents live, Rob?
Sheffield.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, very good. You got a heart and a laugh there. We know that's why you really did this, but another minute. Okay, well, I think we better get going because I know you've got a hard stop at the end of this hour and a few minutes before then. So hello, everybody. Welcome, as I say, to the Practitioner Talk, RCA Service Design TV. We're really delighted to have another amazing designer come and talk to us about their life and their experience. And it's lovely to have Rob that's still with us today, who's beaming in from San Francisco. Yes, is that right, Rob?
Sunnyvale, about 40 miles south.
Well, nearby. It was all in the Bay, isn't it? Rob is an alumni of IDEO. Sadly, after I was at IDEO, so I didn't know Rob that well, but it's been great to come to get to know him. And he's been very interested in sharing with us his background in healthcare. He came out of Brunel here in the UK and hails from Sheffield, as he just mentioned, but he spent most of his life on the West Coast with IDEO and now his own experience practice, Future Medical Systems. So I'm really looking forward to hear of his journey. He's going to talk to you for a bit and then we'll have a Q&A. So get ready with some scintillating questions when Rob is ready to take them from you. So Rob, I'm going to, do you have some slides to share?
I do, yes.
Fantastic. I'm going to showcase you so everyone can see you, spotlight you, I mean. So brace yourselves for being front of screen. There you go. And I'll let you know when your slides are showing. But welcome to the RCA and Service Design course. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, thanks very much, Clive. And
perfect, that's working.
Okay, and the slides are working. That's all fine. Okay, good. Well, I've genuinely been looking forward to doing this. I don't mind getting up at 4:30 in the morning to talk to friends at the RCA. Yeah, so I wanted to spend about a half hour giving you a sense of who I was, what I do, some war stories from the fields, and give you some context. But I really do want to give you a chance to ask questions. I was, like I said, I was looking forward to doing this because I kind of remember my own story as a student. You mentioned Brunel University, and at the point that you are now, I had genuinely no idea what I wanted to do as a career. I was studying mechanical engineering, and most of the opportunities I saw were things at Lucas Engineering, designing fuel pump systems, and I knew I didn't want to do that, and I didn't know why I had found myself there exactly, except I just have this fascination in why things came to be the way they were, and how could they be better than that. And the field of service design certainly didn't exist at that point, and I was only dimly aware of design, and I kind of lucked myself into a career at IDEO as an engineer, and found myself moving towards this space of service design. So in a way, I'm very envious of you all. You've all kind of found a field that didn't really exist by name at that point. But yeah, I would have appreciated the chance to ask questions of somebody who was a few years ahead of me at that time. So I really do want to give you all a chance to ask questions later on. I tend to get carried away in my storytelling. So let's see, I need to keep a clock handy so I know how I'm doing, and I'll move pretty quickly through the stories. Okay, so yeah, I adapted this deck from my professional deck, and this is to give you a sense of what I do now. I'm one of the co-founders of a group called Future Medical Systems. We specialize in bringing service design, healthcare experience design to the healthcare and medical space. There are very few organizations that do that as a specialty. Most people are at a sort of more general sense, and healthcare is a very special, unique space, particularly here in and of course I have very specialized experience in the US. So I'm often embarrassed how little I know about healthcare as an ecosystem in the UK, the NHS being a very globally unique system. The US is a uniquely complex system. And so this is our point of view. You know, we start and end with people. We do a lot of research and insight finding, but we always try and turn that into action. And we believe in a lot in prototyping and scaling. But the next slide, as a contrast to that, was I pulled these slides from my professional deck, and I realized there's a danger of me pitching my company to you all, and you don't need to hear that. This is actually a story about sort of, as I said, as a student, I kind of wanted to hear from people, who are they and how did they get there? And this is who I am now, and what I enjoy doing most of all, which is goofing around with our dog Molly. And this is just to break me out of my professional mode. And this is a story so far. Clive mentioned, grew up in Sheffield, went to Brunel University, doing a course now defunct called the Special Engineering Program, which was actually a rather wonderful course, and a very small course, but it did expose me to design, sort of the meaning of things, the intent of things. And from there, I moved to a company called Technology Partnership in Cambridge. Spent a few years there doing contract R&D, sort of fundamental physics and engineering development, which was really fascinating, really good learning process. And from there, I went to IDEO, and I spent 10 years at IDEO, moving between the offices in Palo Alto and Munich and London. I was head of technical strategy for Europe for a few years, based out of Munich. And then as I moved closer and closer to design, I became the head of medical products across the whole portfolio, part of a team leading up the global practice around healthcare. And then I did a diversion going to AT&T, a huge US telecoms company, setting up an innovation center for them. We had $100 million to set up an institution. We're actually based out of Palo Alto and Plano, Texas, and Ra'anana, Israel. And we pulled that from about 20 people to about 100 people, all kinds of projects across that industry. And then I tired of corporate world pretty quickly and decided to create Future Medical Systems with some other IDEO alums. And this is where I'm most comfortable, most inspired, is spending time in hospitals, in healthcare scenarios, understanding people's experiences. I always say healthcare is one of the easiest places to design. Not that it's simple, it's one of the most complex places to possibly design. The behavior change, everything is behavior change at the end of the day. And the behavior change challenges in healthcare are the hardest ones in the world. But the thing about healthcare versus, say, designing a cell phone is people really, really care. These things really, really matter to people. So I would say the signals are stronger. You ask people about their preferences around healthcare, you get people telling you the most impassioned stories or the most affecting stories you'll hear in your life. And if they don't inspire you, nothing will. And it's also the easiest in the sense that so many things are undesigned or under-designed. And that's particularly the case for practitioners. This is me working with a couple of nurses at Stanford Hospital. And the experiences that nurses and doctors and environmental services people have right through the hospital and down to the reception and the people doing the admin and receiving the medicines are completely under-designed experiences. And so there's a million workarounds, there's a million compromises. And so as a designer, you get to walk on territory which has never been trodden on before. And that's exciting, and there's so much low-hanging fruit, there's so much opportunity. And I get really excited and inspired by getting to do that work, and also work with these amazing, amazing people. You meet people in healthcare who are unbelievably dedicated. I mean, particularly in the last year around COVID, that's kind of obvious to everybody, I think. Also, I get to work with the practitioners and technologists. This is me having my ears experimented upon by an ENT surgeon with some new devices. That's a story I'll touch on later. And of course, I get to go into people's homes and meet patients, meet family members, understand the context of people's lives, which is, of these three, maybe the most important context is really understanding how healthcare experiences knit into the everyday texture of people's lives is the only way you're ever going to design something that really has an impact. The name Future Medical Systems, don't tell anybody, but it's a bit of a joke. It's a joke in the sense that it's supposed to sound very official and old school. But for me, and it's supposed to sound very dry, but the system is people, it's always people. It's not, people think of it in terms of systems being machinery and pipes and software. But at the end of the day, it's about human beings working together to make people's lives better. Nobody's health gets better without humans interacting with each other. So at the end of the day, every one of these problems, every piece of technology, every treatment, every therapy, every procedure is about, did someone understand what it was they were trying to achieve? Could they do it? And were they effective in doing that? And the human-centered design is this toolkit that's emerged over the last 20 or so years, which is all about that. And it's just, from my career, it's been wonderful to be in a field which has really emerged. In that period, I've been able to jump on board that train. As I mentioned, I was a mechanical engineer originally before this field really existed. And so I've kind of seen it evolve and been a very small part of evolving that field. And so honestly, I wish I'd learned more from Clive how you think about service design, how you present service design, but design thinking, human-centered design are all, lenses, different ways of describing the toolkit that I see as foundational to service design. I'm not sure quite how you see that, but there's a lot of different frameworks for explaining what does that mean or what's that point of view. This is one you'll see 150 times, saying, it's about finding the intersection point between these three circles, and we as designers start with people and desirability. As a professional, I tend to linearize that process into this timeline so that my clients can understand what it is we're going to do in time. And I'm just showing you there's just many, many frameworks for talking about human-centered design. And the point is you get to make your own. As somebody in a field that is not exactly completely written down at this point, you, as people coming into service design, get to influence what are these tools, what is this process? And I've really enjoyed doing that, and you're part of that journey too. This is not such an old field that you don't get to be a part of that story. This is my favorite all-time description of what design thinking is, from Bill Moggridge, late of your parish, London, and one of the founders of IDEO, and the guy who coined the concept of interaction design as a designer who found that it was too limiting to think of it in industrial design, and interactions were moving into a sort of intangible digital realm. He was trying to explain to people that we're not designing things anymore, we're designing verbs, we're designing experiences of things. And by understanding the experiences of things, we can then back out to, well, what kind of thing would help people achieve that experience? And as someone working in healthcare, these are the experiences I had a wonderful time creating a slide, thinking back, what were the best questions that I got to work on in my career? And because you can freeze frame this on YouTube later, I don't need to read these out, but these have been some of the most fun, challenging, inspiring questions that I've really, really loved working on in my career. This is like 20 years of work all in one slide. I missed a couple of good ones out, but yeah, how might we make collecting stool samples less scary and gross? Those kind of questions fascinate me more than anything. Again, an under-designed experience. People don't want to think about things like that. And so you get a paper cup. Now, nobody wants to use that paper cup. There has to be a better way. So some stories. Like I say, I wanted to move through this fast. I can't see my time. Oh, there's the time. Okay, I'm going slower than I wanted to. This is a little bit of my journey. So as I say, I started in designing objects. I was that guy designing nouns, engineering nouns. And this is a little bit of a journey. So I'll start more in product design and move towards service design. I didn't mention pretty much everything I work on now is service design. And that's been a change in the last, I'd say that really happened about 5 years ago. So for the first 5 years of my career, I was a mechanical engineer. The middle 10 years, didn't know what I was. I was designing all kinds of things, products and services. And now I'm pretty much entirely a service designer, or as I call it, experience design. So this is working with 3M, a huge US technology company, delivering a new vital sign. You know, a vital sign is what makes something go beep in an operating room or a patient room. And it's what you need to know how someone's doing. This is an incredible technology which had been around for a decade or so to measure someone's core body temperature, not their skin temperature, their core body temperature, which is the temperature of the blood as it exits the heart, by sticking a pad to the skin. This technology existed, but it didn't really have an application. And so 3M wanted to find out, you know, what was the product here? What was this going to be? Because it was used only as a research technology. And so we did observations going into hospitals, and we saw the flow, and we saw how people used vital signs. And one of the things we saw was people plugging and unplugging monitors in and out of the different readouts, you know, in the OR, in pre-op, in post-op, in the patient room, and trying to keep a track. And when you ask the question about what is the vital sign for, obviously you want to know how someone's doing right now, you're trending people's health. But in the long term, one of the things that's really important is it provides proof of quality of care and continuity of care. And then you could see that was being broken all the time as people moved from rooms to different places. So when 3M envisaged a vital sign, they imagined it being on that big screen that's in the operating room that tells you someone's blood pressure and their respiration rate and also their core body temperature. That seemed to be where the important numbers were on that big screen. But what we discovered by looking at the flows through the hospital and what the intent of that number was there's a much bigger opportunity about showing this continuity of care, about showing that the body temperature remained within a narrow band throughout the entire journey, and realized that had a fundamental impact on what this product was going to be. The service that it was providing was continuity of care, so it should travel with the patient. And so instead of being a sensor that plugged in and out of different things, it got its own tiny little display and a bracket, which meant you could attach it to a patient's gurney. And essentially it would go with them through the entire journey. And as someone who worked on this as more of a sort of technologist and engineer, I was fascinated by the way this took our initial conceptions of what this was going to be completely changed. Once we understand it was about trending, you see the trend lines, and it was about continuity. Slightly later in my career, this is working with what at the time was a startup. Well, I guess it's still a startup now. It went through a couple of different hands. It's now Tusker Medical. They've launched this around creating a new ENT clinic experience. Now, this is around ear tube insertion. Ear tube insertion is the second most common surgical procedure in the world after circumcision. And this is when young kids have blue ear, they lose hearing, it can cause developmental issues. And so you put a tiny tube into someone's eardrum and it drains the fluid. Very, very minor procedure. But right now it's done under full anesthetic. And very often it's very often going to be the first time that the child has been under full anesthetic. But for a lot of parents, this is happening between maybe 5 years old and 10 or 11 years old. It might be the first time, certainly the first time they've seen their child go into something like surgery. And it's an extremely emotive experience for a lot of parents. And this was a company who had come up with technology to essentially, it's a tiny probe with a staple gun on the end of it. So you can push the probe down against the eardrum and punch a little hole through there. and insert the little rubber grommet in there while the child is awake. So you're bypassing the need for full anesthetic. And they had this issue that telling a 5-year-old to stay perfectly still for 5 minutes while you did this is a tricky thing to do. And they wanted to design a way of keeping an infant, a very young child, still. And they'd been looking at straps and braces. They'd been looking at various ways of maybe restraining a child, and then also been looking at various distraction techniques. And we talked a lot to child development specialists, people who treated children, child life specialists around cancer treatment, who worked with children through very intense experiences at a young age, pediatric dentists, parents, children themselves, and came to this interesting realization that, particularly as a young company starting out, the most important thing was that there was this very strong peer-to-peer network between parents. And there's this very important moment where a parent is deciding whether or not to choose a certain procedure, this new procedure, or to go the old way. And if you were going to be strapping a child into a chair and they got upset, the experience as a parent would be very disturbing. And that would spread, that would spread around the world very quickly. And so probably what you wanted was a better way of filtering for the children who would be successful at doing this. And parents were actually very good judges of what children could and couldn't do. Some children could be trusted to stay still and calm. Some would always be a little fractious. And what we realized was the most important audience to understand this service was the parents. So you needed to frame the question very well to the parents around what the experience was going to be like, so they could make an informed decision, and hopefully a correct informed decision. And then you could focus on things like calming the child, distracting the child, giving them a choice of things to engage with during that. What you see here is an experience blueprint, a service blueprint, essentially, around what the experience is going to be. I've had to blur some things out for confidentiality purposes. That's not your screen. What the literal experience is going to be, what the roles are of the people in the room, and what are the tools that are there, and what is the emotional experience in the middle that people are going through. And one of the most important predictors of whether a child is going to be calm is if the parent is going to be calm. There's obviously going to be a very strong connection there. And if even before going into a room, the parent is very anxious about it, the child will pick up on that and quite likely become anxious themselves and less likely to succeed at staying still and quiet and calm. And so one of the tools we developed in this project was a storybook. And this was a storybook that on each spread like this on the left, you see a very literal presentation of what will happen to the child. And on the right, you see a description of what it will feel like for the child. And this was not for the child. This is for the parent. And the idea was, if you talk to a parent about the option of doing this particular procedure, they may or may not take in that information. They may feel a little overwhelmed, but the decision probably won't be made then. The decision is more likely to be made at home. If there's a partner in the picture with a consultation of a partner, you actually want them to make a decision in their own time, in their own pace, in a way they feel comfortable. And so what you often hear is the solution is education, right? Education is always the sign of you've given up as a designer if what you want to do is educate your users. You actually want to engage people and give them something that they're attracted to. And so this children's book was, instead of giving somebody a large brochure with the technical details of what will happen and how to make a decision, this children's book is delivering that information in a way that's much easier for a parent to engage in. You can't guarantee, it's quite unlikely they'll go home and read every word on a page with 500 words of description. Give people a children's book like this, it's almost guaranteed they'll go home and flick through it and decide if they want to read it to their kid. If they don't read it to their kid, that's fine, but you've represented the information in a way that's very digestible and help them to make that decision. Final story I'll do. How am I doing on time? Yep, running a tiny bit long. This is working with Stanford Healthcare, Stanford Hospital, just up the road in Palo Alto. And this was just an extraordinary brief, reducing harm from medication error. looking at medication safety right across the hospital system, and how problems could kind of trickle through to patients. And this is an extraordinarily significant issue. Over 500,000 medication injuries annually. This is just in the US, about $1.3 billion of hospital costs coming from dealing with those. And it's a well-known and well-studied phenomenon that in particular, nurses getting interrupted in some way while they're preparing medications is a root cause. It's believed to be a root cause, but I challenge that of a lot of these medication injuries. Interruption, again, it's one of those words to be really suspicious of as a designer. It's a blame word. You're blaming someone else. It's kind of like education. You're blaming someone else for not knowing something. Interruption says that somebody wasn't paying attention. And if you know anything about nurses, they're trying to do their job. Somebody interrupted them. Something in their environment or their context wasn't set up for their success. And so it's interesting to dig into why do interruptions happen. You know this is an issue because the Daily Mail got really angry about it. And so many different things have been tried to deal with these interruptions. And here someone's made nurses wear a bib saying, do not disturb drug round in progress. And so nurses can often feel upset about this because they feel like they're being accused of not being competent. And in this case, the Daily Mail is upset because parents feel like they can't talk to the nurse, which is interesting. And one of the sources of interruptions is that parents really, particularly thinking of a children's hospital, parents really do want to interact with a nurse, and medication time is one of the times when they're likely to be there, and they don't know when is or isn't an appropriate time. It's not an interruption. It's a very well-meant question. There's just not been a frame set up for when to deliver that question. And so, yeah, we spent time in the hospital, in the OR, watching things like anesthesia going on. We went nursing rounds and down into the pharmacy. Another highly underdesigned experience is the pharmacy and the pharma tech experience, in this case, literally in the basement of the hospital, a long way away from what things are happening and all the associated communication challenges that can cause. Because there used to be a time when pharmacists were often on a ward themselves, or there might be a pharmacist up there to consult with nurses. And a little window onto our process. This is us gathering things we'd seen. And on the middle right there's a little story I always think about in terms of systems, human systems and services. This is a nurse taking a drug from something called a Pyxis machine, which is it's essentially a safe, which looks after the most critical medicines, the high alert medicines in the hospitals, the things that can cause the most harm, things like vasodilators like heparin, which need to be done very precisely and accurately. And so in this case, the nurse is going to collect the drugs. And there's a line painted on the floor saying, do not disturb a nurse. Inside this, when you saw those nurses wearing the bibs, that's so that when they're doing things like this, they're not disturbed the most critical moments. And the computer kind of they type the patient's, well, they scan the patient's ID and it's all connected. It's very cleverly thought out that way so that there isn't a mistake. And as we watch this take place very quietly, we saw them paying tremendous attention to this. And then the prompt on the screen said, now count the colase. And the colase is stool softener. It's one of the least important drugs in a hospital. I mean, it's very important in keeping people regular, but it's not it's one of the least harmful things there. And yet this nurse was being asked to count stool softener right after taking out one of the most important drugs. And when you talk to the nurse, they had no idea why that was. It didn't make sense to them either. When you talk to the IT services people and said, well, why would this be the case? They said, well, it shouldn't be the case. If it's not good for the nurses, they know that they can come to us and ask it to be different. There's no particular reason that should be that way. And the point is that this issue, nobody knew that they could talk to somebody else about this issue. So the error was not around technology. It wasn't even particularly around process. It was around communication. And that is so often the case. And so this is the framework we developed coming out of that project, looking at communication, information flows in the hospital, starting from a pharmacy. And you see here the big arrows are the big arrows show where information flows most. So mostly it's down from doctors prescribing towards nurses administrating towards patients. These smaller flows back up. And there's a lot of stories I could tell here, but just to land on the fact that the dots are sort of opportunities that we uncovered to try and reduce the possibility of medication error. And they're all in the spaces between people. That's the most important thing, and understanding sort of communications and information flows between people. And to test out that theory, we brought in, as a pharm tech, nurses, there's even patients here in this room, giving us feedback, saying what was their experience of this journey and what opportunities did they see from their experience. And I think it's extremely important as a designer that we have a great role in organizing information and finding the connections between things. The best opportunities come from the people who actually live this every day. In no project can you possibly get the depth of insight that an actual patient has from their experience in the hospital, or a nurse has from their decades of experience in the hospital. So go back and check with the practitioners, go back and check with the users again and again and again. Check your thinking, check your ideas, check your prototypes. They will tell you things you really, really need to know. And so this is a story around one of the concepts called Meds Time. And this is a moment in the day. So this is, I've gone from designing things to now designing a moment in the day, which was kind of new for me personally, and the team helped me get there. And what we're looking at is saying, you know, Meds Time, everybody knows nurses talk about Meds Time, patients don't talk about Meds Time. They don't really know what is the process here, how do I take part in this? Nobody in the hospital has a bigger stake in medicines going in correctly and accurately than the patient. So why can't the patient have a role in the safety? And if that role is simply to not distract the nurse, that would be an extremely big contribution. Maybe they could even protect the nurse from other distractions. So to see medication safety as a partnership between the patient and the nurse is quite a new idea, or at least it was to the people we spoke to about it. And so we designed this process around that, including digital tools, which could be part of that, including printed things, including a check-in process where a patient would be introduced to this. And we took those ideas back out to the nurses immediately and said, you know, we have these rough ideas, but you guys lead an extraordinarily complicated life. You help us design a process which would work for you, which would make your life better. And in these meetings with nurses, we'd sit down and do a workshop designing this process really from the ground up. And the nurse educator who helped us arrange these sessions, after the second one, said, something amazing happened today, and I bet you guys didn't notice it. I'm like, yeah, no, we didn't notice it. And she said, the amazing thing happened today was more people showed up for the second session than the first session. And that never happens. Usually when you're educating nurses around some new process change, they know that it's just going to roll over, and in 6 months something new will come along and the next new thing. Here they've gone and told their colleagues that something interesting was happening and that they should come along and take part. So that was kind of a vote of confidence, and we ran it as a pilot. These on the left, you'll see some of the posters that were printed to communicate with the family, very deliberately around a graphical language which was approachable to, this is actually in the children's hospital, the Lucille Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford. And also a check-in process in the middle, and the pilot results, 55% decrease in nurse interruptions, 6 minutes saved, and fundamentally foundationally a savings equivalent to 1 nurse salary per year in just nurses being able to show up into a room better prepared and having less interruptions and backwards and forwards during medication administration processes. So I think that's the last slide I had prepared on stories. I feel like I've talked 10 to the dozen, and I'd love to take some of your questions.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much. Do you want to stop sharing now? And
Sure.
We'll bring all the students back onto the screen. Let's put up my gallery view. Thank you very much. Some fantastic insights and some interesting observations how service design kind of evolved as well. I really enjoyed, as you said, it wasn't around when I was a student either, by the way. So we've all kind of invented this service design thing. Thank you. Nice comments going into the chat. Sharanya, do you want to come forward and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for that, Rob. That was really interesting. You spoke about how you were initially a product designer and then your role sort of evolved to be that of a service designer. And I'm just wondering what it will look like in the future. How do you see your practice evolving?
Wow, that treats me with more respect than I think I deserve. I'm not sure I know where it's going. But the best I can see is, I mean, it has been fascinating. I mentioned Bill Moggridge in that he coined this phrase interaction design. And he saw that he saw that he was working on things like digital tools for the first time, you know, the very first laptops, and that there were people having these very different kinds of interactions with content, intangible content on the screen. That was, and you know, he didn't intend to invent service design, but I think by giving it a name, the fact that you would design intangible interactions between things, that naturally led to later on reframing that as service design. And what it is design breaking out of an artist studio. You know, and before he gave it that name, it was industrial design, was the thing that's been around forever. And industrial designers kind of secretly knew some of these. And it's funny talking to industrial designers who really have a lot more experience than me, how they will talk about doing a lot of the things that we do kind of informally. Back in the kind of 70s and 80s, people were doing this stuff. It just didn't have a name. And where I'm heading with that is I feel like this point of view that value comes from the interactions between people. You know, it's not just design, it's value. Doing things better creates value for people and for businesses, is getting out of the artist studios and now out of the design studios, and now is becoming more and more woven into the fabric of companies. So you'll see a good friend of mine, Althea Yomtov, is now doing service design at large financial institutions, and it's just kind of, it's going into these spaces which didn't think they needed design, and it's becoming enmeshed into the decision-making process, the strategic decision-making process. So in a way, I feel like, in a strange way, it's sort of disappearing in the best possible way. It's becoming table stakes, that you would have this lens in making very important strategic decisions very early on. So it's not just disappearing, it's becoming more and more strategically important and becoming more and more of a management and a leadership skill. And I think, you know, I hope that the sort of the generation that you're one of and that this class represent see their role not as just the creators of products or services for things, but of leadership, and taking that point of view, that representing the user's point of view and this overlooked, this critical space of like, wait, but what are people thinking and feeling about this? And taking it, I mean, you say the boardroom, honestly, I don't think the most important decisions take place in the boardroom. They're taking place in informal interactions between leaders. And I hope that you will be those leaders advocating for the user. And I think, I'm not sure if that's the answer you're after, but I think it's, as a designer, being more and more aware of how organizations work and how to influence those organizations around the point of view of the user is where I would like to see it going.
Thanks, Rob. Really fantastic answer. Thanks for your question, Sharanya. I reminded that we had the head of IDEON at that time, Mika Pekka Hansky, I have to check his name there, who came into the course actually almost on my first day a couple of years ago and said, we've got to prepare people for leadership. And I was thinking, yeah, we just got to facilitate, but actually, no, we've got to do more than that. We've got to lead people. So that's a great comment, Rob. Thanks very much. And Sharanya says, thank you. Any more questions before I start throwing questions at Rob? Please, anybody, if you want to come in, let me drop the spotlight. Alessandro, hi.
Hello. Yes. First of all, thanks for the great presentation. I really enjoyed that. I always enjoy designs that revolve around health and you could say ethically delicate areas. And it's regarding that. Personally, on a medical level, I never had experience. The closest thing we've worked on as a group was during the Grand Challenge. We worked around mental health, and that's a completely different field. I wanted to ask you, personally, how do you feel, since the medical sector is always one that sees a lot of resistance with innovation, because innovation many times is a double-edged blade, which can either bring a huge gain or it can bring a huge setback if not implemented correctly. Do you think that perhaps if we want to further evolve the medical market, maybe some ethical barriers should be dropped in the favor of more rapid innovation, or should we keep the industry as it is with its current slow-paced innovation but high ethical barriers?
Wow, that's a really fascinating question. There's so much in there. I mean, just a couple of threads in the question. I know why you say that it's resistant to innovation. I know where that's coming from, and I think that's a reasonable interpretation of like how it manifests. But that doesn't reflect my day-to-day experience. I mean, particularly when you work with startups, there's a whole ecosystem in medical technology who are people trying to do something for the first time. They're about nothing but innovation. But to be fair, on the big institutions as well, you go into every hospital and they'll have something called a quality improvement group, and they're all about process and service design improvement, and that's what they do every day. Those are professionals who work on nothing but, and what they recognize is they're in a very high reliability situation, and it's very risk averse. So the innovations they look at, they have to be able to make a case that they don't add risk, and that's we all want that, right? I mean, this is a practicing hospital. Like, you think of the difference between a startup and the way they work, where they can just throw anything at the wall and see if it works. So there you have very fast, rapid cycles of very radical innovation going on. But then in a hospital, it's going to look very, very different because it's actually medicine as it is practiced. But I think all of those people are increasingly, well, hospitals in particular are increasingly interested in innovation as a practice and adopting that. I mean, after all, some of the fundamental ideas around PDS, Denning cycles around try, do, come out of practice in hospitals, about medicine around, sorry, I didn't make much sense of the sentence. Let's try again. There are some fundamental frameworks around innovation which came out of QI functions. So they're trying to systematize innovation in a way that feels like it's appropriate in a healthcare scenario. So in a way, I'm kind of like slightly pushing against your the idea that innovation is difficult. But I think it's fair. It's a fair question the way you put it. And you were asking about the ethical side. There is, I mean, it's been fascinating in COVID. You actually saw literally the FDA saying, you know what, we'll take a little scrutiny off some of the things around data security so that people can do new things right now, because we need innovation. We need to move very, very quickly right now. And so under the right circumstances, I think some of the, and here everybody is very focused, in America it's called HIPAA, around patient data security, what you can and can't do with that. There is a sense that you need to look at that critically in the light of what are you trying to achieve. And I think in America, the FDA and the government have actually been very responsible about that and very responsive. And you've seen them in the creation of digital therapeutics. So, you know what, we're actually interested in the industry coming to us and talking to us about what is possible and how to put the right safeguards in. So I said right at the beginning, I'm sadly ignorant about how things work in the UK and the NHS. But in America, there's quite a bit of permeability between the regulatory side and the innovators, the people who actually want to make the change. So I'd say that there is a sort of restorative force to innovation. There is kind of like a conservatism that limits how fast people can move in certain contexts, in care environments. Outside of those, people are moving pretty quickly. And then the regulatory side, there is this conversation between the two. If your question was really about personal ethics and like what could we and shouldn't we do, I didn't get to that in my answer, but I probably I'll leave that for another day.
Thanks, Rob. Absolutely brilliant. Let's just have a quick look in chat. Phoebe, hi Phoebe, do you want to jump on?
Hi.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Fine, good.
Very good.
Yeah, just my own reflections in the answer to Alessandra's question, really. Probably similar to what has been already said, but it's just from talking to other people in the NHS, people who work within management there. I think COVID shined a real light on how they could adapt to change more than, I think it was a belief that they just couldn't do it. But I think COVID has shown many systems that change can happen very fast, and that they're probably start to adapt to that, and that gives service design this huge opportunity to show that it can support this change.
Nice comment. Thank you. Any thoughts on that, Rob?
I mean, I think what I've seen is, again, I talked about all the opportunities or interactions between people. I think there is this issue of people in the healthcare domain, practitioners and designers, and there historically hasn't been that much understanding and respect between those two domains. And I think it's very easy to set up a sort of oppositional tension between those two, that you guys are all focused on doing things the same way they're all been done. You guys are all crazy people with Post-its who want to change everything. And although there's a sort of like there's truth in the mentality that yes, these people want to change everything, and yes, these people are focused on safety. If you have a productive conversation about we're all interested in the well-being of the patients and the practitioners, you start there, there isn't a conflict. There just isn't. Like if you listen respectfully and talk to people about what they can and can't do and what is and isn't safe and reasonable to do. I mean, for example, the example I gave around medication safety, we talk to people about doing a pilot on the wards live with patients receiving treatment. These are people, organ transplant patients, and people were like, wait, we can't experiment on people having organ transplants with your new thing. And we're like, we're not going to change anything that's safety. We're just like related to safety. It'll just be a role play. It'll be go in and have this conversation with somebody and ask them how they feel that conversation. Could that do any harm? No, I don't see how it could do any harm. You have a discussion about what nurses feel comfortable doing, what impact it's going to have on their process. And if the nurses, I talked about that workshop we did, if the nurses opt in and say, I want to do this is something I can do, then you've kind of got past that sense that we're in tension. Like, so once the nurses are advocating for the change and the quality improvement groups want to advocate for the change, then there's no, you've got to check a few boxes around safety and make sure that it's all documented right. But it's not a conflict. It's all everybody pulling in the same direction.
Brilliant, thanks. Phoebe sort of followed that up in the chat, but I know we're a little bit time poor, so I'm going to ask you two questions, I'm afraid. I'm going to pull my rank. The first question is the future of healthcare and medical treatments, because we did a very interesting project here with our second years last term with Genomics England, where the health organizations are increasingly almost automatically taking DNA testing to spot future health problems. And of course, that sounds fantastic and it helps science and research. But how does that information get played back to people? Terrified us, actually. So we did a really interesting project, and the three projects have all been taken up in some form or another by the NHS, which is really exciting. And there's also things like AI and all that kind of stuff. Where do you see the future of healthcare going?
Oh, it's another one of those unfair questions. So, I mean, I see the projects I work on, definitely those themes show up, genomics, AI. I think one way of interpreting that, there's so many different answers. One way of interpreting that is I see a breakdown of this one-size-fits-all model of healthcare, which means practitioners had to learn a system of care and apply that system care kind of equally to everybody. It was the only way of handling the complexity. But as the complexity goes up and up and up and things become more and more tailored, I think the natural place for that to go is that patients and families themselves will be the people more and more involved in the delivery of care, which is not to say doing it themselves, but with tools helping them, those AI tools we talked about, actually being responsible around customized tools, customized treatments. And so it will be, in a way, more responsibility in the hands of patients and families and people who are not well themselves, but more systemic. So I think what you're seeing is the blurring of this line of physical and mental health or behavioral health. And so those things become kind of more holistic and more around lifestyle change. So that, I mean, in a way, every treatment should come with an exercise and a diet regime, like, because that's the biggest impact you could have on someone's health. And so you're seeing people like Armada Health looking at self-directed care around diabetes, and people looking at people like Big Health over in San Francisco looking at CBT for people with depression, anxiety. And these are things where patients step up and take a very active role in their own care. And I think that's this sort of distribution of health out into the community and the breaking down of walls between practitioners and patients.
That's fascinating. That's absolutely great. We've got a couple of questions before I ask my final question and let you go. Danny says, should clinicians be design literate? And Howard says clinicians should know everything. I disagree with Howard, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
Clinicians should is such a it's a designer in me, like what were words that triggered me so far? Educating people and interruptions. I think should clinicians be anything? Clinicians have an overwhelming burden in their life. I think we should be empathic towards clinicians and try and understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. I think clinicians can be very design literate. There's a lot. I love working with Stanford Healthcare, the group up here. So many of those physicians are incredibly engaged. To take classes at the D School here at Stanford and very interested in design thinking and see the relevance of design to practice and the processes of healthcare. So I think, sorry. I mean, it's a joke. I think, Helming, you're saying it's how much clinicians need to know. You're responding to a question. I understand. Clinicians need to know everything. Yes. I think your point is that how can they be design literate on top of everything else they're doing? I think that would also be my answer too. They should focus on whatever it is they feel they can do best.
Very good, very good. Absolute last question, then we'll let you go. What's your tip for my wonderful students? Second year is about to graduate, first year is about to become second year. Do you have any tip for them?
Yeah, I do actually. I think the thing that served me best in my career is to be curious and be a little playful. I think, be curious about where you can go and things you can do. If you see something that looks interesting, dig into it and see where that path takes you, and be a little playful with it. Be prepared to say things that embarrass you or seem a little bit crazy. And maybe you'll find something that no one else has thought before.
Fantastic tip. Thank you so much, Rob, for giving your time, for getting up so early in the morning. You've done incredibly well. We have a tradition here on this event, and all my students will now please turn your microphones on, come off mute, and we would like to give you something you probably haven't heard for a while, which is a round of applause. Thank you.
Okay.
There you are. That's the only experience we can really recreate at the moment.
Thank you very much. I was excited to come and speak to you all. It's been honestly, it's an honor to talk to all you people engaged in the future of service design, and all the best.
Thanks, Rob. Good luck to you. I'm sure we'll be in touch with you again. And do come and see our show. We'll send you an invite.
Okay, I look forward to it. Take care.
Thanks, Rob. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you again next time.